So, welcome to this episode of This Cycling Life Technical Bites. Today, I'm joined again by Professor Josh, and we're going to be talking today about plyometrics. So, Josh, why don't we jump straight in? Plyometrics is something that we've talked about a lot on This Cycling Life in our webinars and in some of our other technical bite sessions as well. But today, we're really dedicating the next 20 minutes or so to the topic. Can you tell us a little bit about the history behind plyometrics? Like where I understand it kind of emerged during the 80s with the Russians integrating it into athletic programs and stuff. But can you tell us a little bit about like what it is and where it's come from?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Professor Jamie. I appreciate having me back. Actually, plyometrics kind of came out a little bit earlier than that. Came out probably about in the 50s or 60s. Professor Verskinsky, it's a Russian name, Verkinshansky. I'm not very good at my Russian, unfortunately. I should be, considering my family's part Russian. But he actually initiated it and started it with a lot of the Soviet athletes, especially in track and field. Because if you think about those sports, a lot of those are the bounding, the jumping, the hopping, the throwing, where you need that explosive power to come about. And it wasn't until about the 60s that plyometrics really took its name and actually came from a US track and field coach. And that's really kind of where it came from in our modern day strength training, is it comes from a track and field background rather than just the overall strength idea.
And obviously now, I mean, when I was getting early on into plyometrics and I was Googling, I found loads of stuff in sports like basketball. So I understand in the US, in a sport like basketball, which involves jumping, it's really a huge part of training for those athletes. But can you tell us a bit more about like we know the word plyometrics, but how do you see it in the gym? Like what are the specific exercises that you would see an athlete doing when they're following a plyometric regime?
Sure. When we think about plyometrics, we kind of think of them in three terms. We think of them in jumping, hopping, and bounding. So jumping, think about it, is a lot of times we think of vertical jumps, especially basketball players, volleyball players. You got to block the shot. You've got to, dig it out in that sense in those sports. So we see a lot of vertical jumps. We might even see horizontal jumps. When we look at hopping, now we're actually coming into more of jumping forward, like kind of a broad jump. We may even see some lateral jumps in that sense. So think about baseball players. I know maybe being in Belgium, maybe not seeing too much baseball, American baseball, but think about a baseman, like a third baseman or a first baseman. They're in a position and they got to move to a certain position to get the ball. So we might see some lateral hopping in that sense. And then when we look at bounding, bounding kind of is that hopping, but in a forward motion. So go back to the idea of track and field. Think about the triple jump. You see the runner run down, he lands on the right foot, skips to the left foot, hips to the right foot again, and then kind of does a vertical jump, kind of like a long jump in that sense. So now we're getting into a little bit more forward motion in that sense. So those are probably going to be your three, especially for lower body. But we might actually see some upper body plyometrics as well as some core plyometrics, but we kind of don't see them at maybe the core as much in that sense.
Yeah, of course, another great proponent during his career of plyometrics was Lance Armstrong. And there's some pretty famous photographs and footage of him when he was recovering from cancer using both, the what you've talked about, the jumping, the hopping, the bounding, but also the upper body plyometrics, like the push-up with the clap in between, for example, very explosive kind of movements. So coming to Lance, I mean, clearly, Lance has had a pretty interesting history post-career after we've understood how he got to his success, not only through plyometrics, but through some chemical additives. But talk to us about plyometrics and cycling, because actually it has made a big splash in cycling, perhaps over the last 5 to 10 years. We've seen many more professional athletes using plyometrics, although for amateurs, it's still relatively unknown. So why plyometrics in cycling?
So think about our sport. Cycling is a speed sport. The goal of the Tour de France, get to the end in the shortest amount of period of time. So plyometrics helps us build that strength, that speed, especially if we are working up, climbing a hill. We definitely need some additional strength to do so. It actually also improves a little bit of coordination. Think about, we watch children walk. The first time they get up, I'm sure your children, when they first time they started walking, they kind of wobbled around a little bit and then they fell down. but they kept on getting back up and they got better coordination through doing it. And it also helps to improve somewhat of injuries. Because if you think about it, the idea of plyometrics is not only just strengthening the muscle, but it also strengthens the attachment points, those tendons. And that's really going to be something that's really important, especially with certain athletes that are at higher risk for injuries in that sense.
Can you talk to us for a second about what actually happens in the muscles, and you mentioned the joints and the ligaments and tendons
Sure.
during a plyometric exercise. So you talked about jumping, which is one of the core
Sure.
plyometric exercises. So maybe you can talk to us about that and then relate that, because of course in cycling, we do have to often, engage in very explosive efforts, coming out of a corner or jumping across to a breakaway or launching a sprint. So what's going on in the gym with plyometrics, and how then does that transfer across to the bike with regard to the physiology?
It's a great question, Professor Jamie. So think about the video that you posted, I think it was last week, about the box jumps that you're doing. If you look at the motion of a box jump, we can break it down into 3 specific maneuvers. We look at it as a muscle lengthening. So when you're coming down into the squat, we're forming an eccentric contraction where the muscle lengthens. At the bottom of the squat, you kind of held it for a second. That's kind of that isometric contraction. In plyometric terminology, we call it the amortization phase, where if you want to think about it, think about trying to do a push-up against a wall and you're pushing against it, but there's no movement. And then that third, when you exploded up onto the box, that's the concentric portion of it, the muscle shortening portion to it. So if you think about cycling, think about sprinting, the idea is to explode out of the position you're in, come around somebody and get to the finish line, or potentially get to a point that you want to win a sprint primo or something along that line. You want to be able to generate as much force through the pedals so that you can explode around somebody is a great example. Another example we might even see is maybe at the beginning of a time trial, when the person starts out real fast and then they're able to settle into that specific power that they're going to be working at for that period of time.
So why? I understand that because I understand what's going on in your muscles, but why not just do that on a bike, or why not just do that running, for example? I mean, what's really unique about plyometrics that's perhaps even better than doing that on the bicycle?
So think about strength training. When we're in the gym, we're lifting a weight. It's not really specific to what we're doing. So the idea of plyometrics is it becomes a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a little bit harder to do jumping on the bikes, especially if, let's say, we're clipped into the pedals. We can't explode out of the pedals as much, but what we can do is we can generate as much force through the downstroke that will allow us to propel us to go forward in that sense. And that's really where those plyometrics are coming into play. They're allowing us to be a little bit more specific to our training and what we're actually doing on the bike in comparison to, let's say, just doing a bicep curl or a calf raise in the gym.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's something definitely that I saw. So I started integrating plyometric training into my strength training about 2 years ago with my coach, Alan Davis. And I was quite impressed to see the results in terms of power. So where I actually really saw it was in that first sort of 2 to 3 seconds of real initial power output. And I saw that increase somewhere 10, 15% after going through a full plyometric program corresponding or aligning to the strength work that I was doing as well. So I did see that. But the other thing I felt actually was that I also felt that in longer races, particularly, say in the middle of the race where you come to a climb and there's some attacks or you have to bridge over the top of a climb, I actually felt that I had more, how do I put it, like endurance power as well. I was still able to put out that kind of higher wattages when needed. What does the research show there in addition to the explosive power? Are there benefits in terms of, sort of the endurance or broader benefits?
The research is kind of equivocal in the field. If you look at some of the research,
equivocal. What do you mean? What do you mean by equivocal?
50,
I'm Australian, man. I told you before. English is my second language.
50-50. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't work.
Okay.
So it's kind of like it's going to be based upon what works kind of for you. Sometimes it does work for some athletes, but the idea also is it's helping to build the potential of what's going to happen in the future. It's, kind of like when you go to the gym, you're going to lift weights, you're going to get stronger, and that's going to benefit you to be able to continue to do things at a longer process rather than just one and done. It keeps your matches dry in that sense, if you want to think about that in the race. It allows you to continue at a higher workload, but it doesn't use up too much of your powder, so that you're able to get through the whole race, or at least bridge over if you need to at that particular time.
Yeah, cool. And I guess that's something which, again, when we're talking to Michael Rogers or Alan Davis, they're always impressing upon our audience that you train for the hardest part of the race, and it doesn't matter if you can produce 300 or 315 watts normalized power for 3 hours if you can't produce that 1,000 watts or 1,200 watts to bridge across to a break or to win a sprint. All that watts that you produce for 3 or 4 hours can often come to naught. It's the difference between winning and coming 15th, across the line, or missing that breakaway, of course, when it goes. So that's well appreciated. So how would you recommend someone to get started? I mean, for me personally, when I came to plyometrics, I'd already been building strength, doing strength workouts in the gym for several years, at least a couple of times a year, spending 8 to 10 weeks of gym strength building. But I did start relatively easy with a limited number of exercises. What would you recommend for someone new to plyometrics?
Definitely the biggest thing would be start slow, because injuries do happen. So one of the things you definitely want to focus on, if you look at some of the literature that's actually been written about plyometrics, Dr. Donald Chu, who's probably one of the foremost authorities in plyometrics, writes in his book that you should be able to perform 50 repetitions of squats at 65% of your one-arm repetition maximum. That's a lot of repetitions.
Sure.
Another thought is 1.5 to 2.5 times your body weight in squats. So again, you want to lay a foundation. It's like anything with your training. You want to lay a base foundation, because if you don't have that aerobic engine, you could have the best anaerobic capacity in the world, be able the best sprinter in the world, but to get to the end of a 200K race, you're just not going to get there. So we definitely need to have that foundation first. Second, start with small jumps. Definitely don't go into the gym and think you're going to be doing a 50 centimeter jump or 50 meter, these aren't going to happen. Start with basically being able to land properly. You want to land on your feet. Don't land on your toes. Don't land on your heels. You want to be able to land and not see that your ankles or your knees come in, because then we might actually have to start working with somebody. You might want to invest in working with a coach, a strength coach. In Europe, probably going to be a physio. Here in the United States, we call them strength conditioning coaches. But working with someone that can actually watch you and work with you to make sure that you are landing properly. And start slow. Start with bound jumps that are on 2 feet, and then maybe progressing from a 2-foot jump into a 1-foot jump, and then work in from a 1-foot jump into a 2-foot jump. So you can see that you're going slowly.
Yeah.
Make sure that you don't increase the volume too much. Think about, you're not going to go out from your first ride of a, let's say a 10K ride. You're not going to do 100K the next day.
Yeah.
Start out with maybe 3 reps, per set, and then potentially work your way up a little bit. And if you get tired, take your time. You need to rest. Remember that you're building energy capacity.
Yeah.
So that workload is being done by an energy system, and you need to replenish it. So there might be rest periods of up to 5 minutes or so. So do think about that also.
Yeah, great advice. I mean, in fact, the advice that my coach gave me, particularly being a masters athlete, was actually to, for me, predominantly, I'm using box jumps. And there's also a reason for that, because, as you age and you do need to take care of your joints and your ligaments and tendons in particular, the benefit that I found with the box jumps is actually, you get the velocity. So you get the power exertion, but you're not landing on your full body weight. And some of the stuff I read actually said that when you actually jump up to the box, your body is only then absorbing about 5 or 10% of what it would be absorbing if you were doing a bound where you jump into the air, then your body comes down and you actually then take on the full weight of your body during a jump. So for me personally, I do prefer to do those lower impact plyometric exercises, just because I do want to take care a little bit of my joints, and I find those work. The other thing you mentioned, which is interesting, is now I complement, as I said, just a general strength exercise in the gym. So I might do 4 or 5 different leg exercises, squats and single leg presses and leg curls and stuff. And I do plyometrics as well. But what I do find is that, if I'm doing, say, 3 sets of 10 vertical jumps, I'm really tired afterwards. And I'm interested to get your perspective on that as well. What is going on in terms of your energy system? Because for me, doing 10 jumps, and I'm about 170 centimeters tall, which is about 5'7". I'm jumping at the moment up to around 1 meter in height, but I do find that explosive effort to do that, 10 times, 3 by 10, it really, really does exhaust me after the workout. And why is that? Is it burning the glycogen, or what's going on there, Josh?
Well, think about the energy system. So in simple terms, we have 2 energy systems. We have an aerobic, which is going to be kind of that ability to go forever, that endurance. We also have an anaerobic energy system. And in the anaerobic system, we kind of break it up into 2 ways. We have that creatine phosphate or phosphocreatine system, and then we have glycolysis. So think about how long that explosive exercise is going to take. It should take you a short period of time. But those energy systems, we only have a limited amount, especially of phosphocreatine in our muscles that we actually, or should say, within the muscle or the cytosol itself of the cell. So we only have a limited amount, and over time we are going to use up some of that, and then we're going to kind of get into a little bit of glycolysis where we start breaking down sugar. But we want to be able to replenish those stores, and that explosiveness kind of takes a lot out of you. So think about sprinting, that quick burst that you do. If you do that and then rest for 30 seconds and then do another one for 30, come back and do it again, and then rest, and then do it again, you're going to basically break down that system and use up those energies so that you are going to be more physically exhausted. And you definitely want to take that time to recover, take a few extra minutes. I always talk about it in classroom. Think about those power lifters when they lift weights. I kind of describe their rest recovery period as when they eat a donut and have a cup of coffee. Because actually, I had a friend that's how he used to recover between sets. So definitely take that time to recover, because it does take a lot out of you. And that explosive power is very forceful, very high generating power. That takes a lot of energy for you to utilize in the beginning.
Understood. And so, and that actually parallels very much with, again, what I do with my coach Alan Davis out on the road, because when I'm doing my standing start sprints, for example, I might do 5 sets of 10-second or 15-second explosive sprints, and I do have a full 5 minutes typically rest between each one, and that's full rest. It's not riding along. It's literally, if I can, sitting beside the road, having a donut, drinking a coffee, whatever, because that does allow your body, I guess, to recover and get those energy stores topped up again for the next effort, which is what you want. So it makes a lot of sense. Anything, I think we've touched on sort of the risks, and in terms of, taking it easy, doing it gradually, getting some advice on technique. Very, very important there as well. How about the looking weird in the gym? Because I have to say, man, like when I'm doing plyometrics in the gym, people are looking at me strange, because, there's all these huge guys pumping iron, and I'm like hopping and jumping around like a kangaroo. Should we really care about that?
No. We wear Lycra. Come on. If we can go out and ride Lycra, I think we could pretty much do anything. But the big thing is, make sure the area that you're training in is safe. When I used to be teaching California, I taught a strength and conditioning class, and I watched a student actually do plyometrics against the wall. And literally every time he jumped up onto a box, it looked like his head hit the wall. So be aware of where you're training, wear your proper clothing, be safe in that sense, but just don't worry about what others are going to think of you, because, we're already wearing Lycra, and we shave our legs. So come on,
I got you there. I have to say, I do have a few plyometric scars, particularly on my shins from being overambitious with some of my early efforts to jump up. For those of you who would like to see some pretty amazing plyometrics from Cyclist, Google Anna Mears. And Anna's an Australian sprint cyclist, now retired, and she was around 160 centimeters tall, which I guess is around 5'4" or 5'5", She was able to jump up to around 120 centimeters, which is more than 2/3 of her height. Really impressive when you see people doing that. But of course, Professor Josh, as you know, myself and Anna, we are Australians, so we do have that kangaroo thing going with us. So I think for us, the bounding and the hopping and the jumping thing kind of comes naturally. For you Americans, for the Brits, for the Belgians, I think probably you have to work on it. It doesn't come as naturally as it does for us. So Professor Josh, thanks a lot for your time. We hope that you've enjoyed this video. Please do give us the thumbs up and of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Professor Josh, until next time, thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.